Hey, everybody. It's Coach Simone Kelly here with another edition of Own Your Power Radio. And I'm so happy and delighted to have Rachael Kahn from HarperCollins in the house. Hey, Rachael, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Simone.
It's so good to see you. Longtime friend. I've known you for, geez, is it 18
Like
years? It's 18
a
years.
long time, like almost 20 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it feels like yesterday. So for those who don't know, Rachael is senior editor. Is that just still your title, right?
Executive editor.
Oh, excuse me, executive editor.
Yeah. You could just call me whatever, hon.
At HarperCollins, and we've known each other for so long. But I met her many years ago at the Harlem Book Fair.
Yeah.
At a writer's lab they have where you actually sit down and talk to an editor that can critique your work. So she was literally my introductory to meeting people in publishing, because most of my friends read my work and were like, oh, it's so good, but I didn't have anybody really critique it professionally. So meeting you, Rachael, changed my life. So I'm always
so glad. That's lovely. Thank you. Yeah.
So tell us about how you got started in your career in publishing, and tell us what you do exactly. What is it? What is the
publishing?
Executive editor? Not many people that might not know what that is.
So I'll start by telling you what I do, which is I work directly with authors to work on their book. I am the first person who kind of gets them in the door for a publishing house. So for my employer, HarperCollins, which is one of the big 5 publishers, I go out and work with literary agents who send me their clients' work. I work with writers who are represented by literary agents, and I say, like, okay, send me your client's best stuff, and because I'm always looking for books to publish, and they send me the books and I read them. And I mean, I would say that I probably read about 10 to 15 books on submission a week, both fiction and nonfiction. A week, but you know, the truth is, like, you don't really read the entire book. So sometimes if it's nonfiction, it might be a proposal that's only 20 pages long. Sometimes it's a really long manuscript, but you only really have to read the first 50 pages to know whether it's for you or not for you. So I'm not saying I actually read 10 to 15 books a week, but I basically review 10 to 15 projects a week. And then if it's something I really love, then I go back to the agent and say, look, this is something I think I would be really good at publishing. And then a lot of times other publishers will be interested. If it's a good book, then there's a number of editors in the business who are also looking for the same really good things. And so they will, sometimes it'll be a competitive situation, and the agent is sort of looking to get the most money and the most benefit for their clients. So then we try and negotiate. And sometimes it's not a competitive situation, but it's just an author whose story I really love. And so I will get money from my boss. The publishing house is the one that pays the advance, and I will do the deal. So about half of my job is basically acquisitions and contracts. It's going out and working as a talent scout to find the writers and bring them in to be published by the company I work for. And the other half is the actual editorial work, which is actually spending a lot of time with the author to perfect the book. Like, you want the book to be everything that you know it can be in order to find its readership and be successful in the marketplace. And so that means that I actually go through and I read it and I line edit and I talk at length with the author about the characters and the scenes and the plotting and all of the things that go into making the book really good. So that's a very intensive part of working with the author on their craft. And then I oversee the publication of the book. So that means, like, working on things like dealing with marketing and publicity and the cover and the design of the book. And then I'm also the person who talks the book up to the corporate sales force. So I'm talking about the book, pitching it, selling it constantly to the people who then go out and sell it into the bookstores.
I wanted to interject about the editing process, because that's one of the things that I really loved, being that I self-published and worked with editors versus working with a major publisher, because it's so many levels of editing. It's not just line editing. Like, I didn't know the difference. I just thought, editing means looking for typos and that's it. Like, you're really more like a developmental editor. Is that what they call it? And I gotta say, I loved your notes. I still laugh.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
They were hilarious.
It's definitely like that's a big part of the benefit that you get when you work with a publisher, is with one of the big 5 publishers, and also with some of the smaller ones too, if they have an editorial staff, is you really you get the best knowledge about how to make your book better and how to make the story better. So
Mhm.
yeah, and different authors need different levels of it. Some authors need a lot of it, some really don't.
Right.
But yeah, it's structural, it's developmental, and sometimes, I mean, with some authors, I really go in and like help rewrite, because some authors are better storytellers than they are like line by line writers.
Okay.
So I might go in and sort of do a little bit of that work too. But look, I think everybody needs to be edited. Anything that I write, like, I will show to other people. My own work gets sort of sent out to be mostly copy edited, which is like for style and grammar and spelling and that kind of thing. But everybody can use an extra pair of eyes on their work, I think.
What would be considered the fact checking? Is that considered line editing?
We don't really do fact checking, true fact checking, like you would get if you were publishing your piece in Vogue or the New Yorker or the Washington Post or something. That's an entirely different thing. That involves paid fact checkers who basically go in and they look at everything that's factual in your work. And you don't see this with fiction because it doesn't happen.
Can I say something? Because that was one of the things that impressed me about HarperCollins, is when they edited my work, they were very detailed. It was like, is this street a real street? Did you make this up? And I'm like, no, that's a real street. So it was really cool.
Yeah,
They
that's
did
the copy editor. The copy editor will go through and they will definitely double check that kind of thing.
Okay.
Like if you get true fact checking, like in magazines, they will call people.
Oh.
So it'll be like if if you say that X, Y, and Z happened, like with this congressman, they will like call that congressman and get them to verify it. Like that's true journalist fact checking.
Yeah.
We mostly, like in book publishing, it is things like double checking if right, that like a certain street exists in a certain city, or that if you say that it was Friday, May 15th, 2019, like they're going to make sure that that day was a Friday.
Wait a minute. That was one of the biggest things that helped too. Okay, so I remember when I was writing, I didn't really always have like the perfect outline of when something happened. So they would be like, well, what day is it now? He left the house on Friday. What day is it now? Or how many weeks have gone by? So it's really cool to have a timeline as well, like when you're writing, I think.
Yeah, that's basically getting like consistency, editing, and it's really important. And there's actually, even in movies, they pay people to go through and be consistency editors to make sure that, like, if the actress is wearing a certain set of earrings in one scene and then they reshoot the scene 2 days later, when they cut the scenes together, she's still wearing the same pair of earrings. Yeah. It's the equivalent of doing that in books. And yeah, that's a big part of what the fact checker does.
Right. Well, you mentioned a couple times the top 5 publishers. Who are the top 5 so people know? So I have that on there.
So the big 5 publishers in New York, like when I started in the business, there were more like 8, and then they keep buying each other up. So the number keeps reducing. It's Simon & Schuster is 1, Penguin Random House is 2, HarperCollins is 3, the Macmillan Group is 4, and then the Hachette Group is 5. And within those groups, those big corporations don't really mean anything to the reader, because within those corporations, there are a lot of little divisions. So the name you see on the book is usually not the name of the big 5. It's the name of one of those divisions within it. And a lot of the divisions within the big 5, I mean, some of them are publishing houses that are hundreds of years old, but they've just been, HarperCollins is over 200 years old.
Wow.
But they've been kind of over the years all added up into these big corporate like lumps. So they basically function more like giant, communication groups. And even then, they're owned by larger corporate entities. So like Simon & Schuster is owned by the big media giant Viacom, and we're owned by News Corp. Yeah,
I didn't do that either. I'm learning new things.
Yeah, the good news is that it's not like it doesn't really matter too much to the reader or the consumer. because the way the books are published, it tends to sort of follow with the way the smaller divisions within, they each operate as their own mini publisher within a big corporate group.
Right. Well, one of the things that a lot of the authors I know want to know from you is, what are some things you look for in an author before signing them? And we know definitely have an agent. That's a whole nother show.
Have an agent.
But then what, is there a specific, I mean, obviously you want to know that you like the work, but is there anything about that actual author that's important, that they need to have like a following, they have marketing? Like, what are some things that you might look for that might be a plus?
I think it depends on what kind of book it is. So for nonfiction, if it's a book where the author is positioning themselves as being an expert in the field about something, and they really want to talk, you know, if they are publishing a book that where they're kind of saying, I'm the authority on this, or I know a lot about this and you should listen to me, then something like platform really does matter. It's, what are that person's credentials? Do they have a following? That sort of thing. With fiction, which is primarily what I do, a lot of it really, it comes down to two things. It's like, what are the words on the page? Is the person a really good storyteller? You know, are they, is the story fantastic? Like, do you want to just keep reading it? Is it something that people are really going to get pulled into and identify with emotionally and like have all the feelings? And then in terms of the author, it's like you want to know that the author is someone who takes his or her work seriously and is professional about what they want to do, and also is open to all the things that I would need them to do. And it's not just like doing the editing, but if you're going to be edited by a big company like the one that I work for, that means that you're someone who's really looking to do this as a career. And we ask our authors to really participate in the marketing and the publicity of their books. So a lot of them still have day jobs. I'm not saying you have to quit your day job.
Right.
Please keep your day jobs. But you have to be really serious about doing it. So, you know, if I talk with an author and they're like, well, you know, it's just something that I kind of wrote, then, and that doesn't happen very,
they don't want to write any more books, in other words?
That rarely happens, because most of the time, you know, the authors who I'm working with are represented by literary agents. So they've taken the step of like, they're serious about their career, like they have professional management.
Right.
But there are definitely times when I talk with authors, like at writers' conferences, where, you know, they don't necessarily know that, like, they know that they really like the story that they've told, but they don't. Then when you sort of start talking to them about like, okay, how do you see your book in the larger marketplace? Like, what are your ambitions for the book? And they kind of can't answer that question. Then I know that they're not really ready yet. I've definitely talked with people who say things like, oh, you know, I've written this book that's about X, Y, and Z, or I want to write this book. And I'll say, okay, what other books in the market, like what's the competition for this book? What other books in the marketplace are like it? And, you know, who are the writers that you admire, whose work you think is sort of similar to your own? And there are definitely times where people will be like, I don't know. I've literally had people, I've asked that question, and people say, you know, I don't really read that many books, or I don't really, you know, I don't. And I just sort of think like, well, if you don't actually really read the books and know about books, then what makes you think you can write a commercially successful book? It's sort of like, you know, if you might be able to cook a good dish, but if you don't really know anything about the ingredients and, you know, all that, then you're sort of not ready to share that with the world yet.
You kind of answering the second question in a way. The next question I had was, what would be some reasons why an author would be rejected by a publisher?
I mean, some of it is, it really comes down to the work. I had a boss who used to always say, but what's the book? Like, is the book really good? And if the book is really, really good, then that means that you have an author who is, you know, who's a good storyteller, who's probably ready to take the next step. If the book is really good, the only reasons that I can think of where the author themselves would be the deal breaker is, every now and then I'll talk with an author. I usually talk with authors before if I want to buy their book, I talk with them before I ever offer money, because I want to know whether they would be someone I would enjoy working with and who I think would be good to work with.
Yeah.
And they need to know that about me. Like, I've
Right.
definitely had conversations with authors where, you know, they were talking with 5 editors and they talked with me, and for whatever reason they like chose to work with someone else. And that's just real. It's a job interview.
Like kind of like my
else.
Rachael.
You know, there is a big best-selling book where I talked with the author, and I had some hesitation about the way she handled some critical stuff in the book, and some scenes where I thought, like, that doesn't really work. And I mentioned that when I was talking with her, because I was like, you know, for the amount of money that her agent wants me to pay, like, I need to know that she's willing to do the work. And I think that she just didn't want to, she disagreed with me. And just didn't want to do that work. And so she went and worked with someone else, and the book was a huge success. So, you know, it just meant that she and I were not meant to be business partners. But sometimes, every now and then, I'll talk with an author and I'll say, like, look, you know, I think that you could do all of these things to improve your book. You need to change the ending or cut it down a little because it's a little long or whatever. And every now and then I'll have an author who will just sort of say, like, no, I won't do that. Either I had one time I had a woman say to me, I spent 10 years writing that book and I know every word in that book and I'm not changing any of them.
Whoa.
And I was kind of like, you know what? That is totally your prerogative. If that's you being you and you feel really strongly about that, like, it is not my job to change your mind.
Right.
But it means that you and I will not be working together, because that's not the kind of business partnership I want.
Right.
That's all.
Because at the end of the day, you have to have thick skin and also be willing to compromise and, you know, and take criticism too.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, because
I think so. I mean, I think you have to be willing to trust that an editor is going to help you make your work better, and that their vision aligns with yours, and that they have your best interests at heart, which is why it's really important for authors to talk with potential editors, because the editor should be working in service of the author's vision. And if the editor and the author have really different visions, then those are people who should not be working together. It doesn't mean that either of them is like wrong or stubborn or a bad person. It just means that, like, that your visions don't line up, and nobody wants that. Everybody winds up feeling bad in those situations if you try and duke it out, you know.
So another question that came from the Writers Lab. Excuse me. For those who don't know, we have a group on Facebook called Writers Lab. So if you're interested, we'll put the link. But they wanted to know the pros and cons of being signed to a major publisher versus self-publishing. Because I know self-publishing is definitely where I got my start, you know. So there's a little rattly sound going on. I don't know what that is. Just your headphones or the phone?
It might be. Okay, let me move my headphones and then I will stop touching them. Okay.
There we go.
So I have worked my entire career for big corporate publishers, but I am not in any way opposed to self-publishing. I think that there are real benefits to both, and this is where sometimes when I talk with authors who are still trying to plot out how they want their career to unfold, I'll say you should consider all of your options and then decide what works best for you. I think with self-publishing, the real benefit is that you can put out the work really efficiently and really quickly. Like, it takes no time to, especially if you're working with a platform like Amazon or Smashwords or, you know, any of there are several good ones out there.
I never heard of that one.
Smashwords is an older one. You know, there are a lot of different self-publishing kind of platforms, but you can have like a finished work that's available for sale very quickly. And you kind of get as much out of it as you put into it. So for someone who doesn't want to go through the long process of finding an agent or trying to find a big publisher, which can take years sometimes.
It's not a game.
It's not right.
Look how long it took me. And even when I tell people all the time, even though I got my book deal without an agent, it still was hard to get an agent after I got the book deal.
Yeah, it is. And I think that I think that not everyone, it just depends on how important it is to them to be like a professional writer. And you might enjoy being a professional writer and just have the book out there and have it available, but not want to devote that much time to it. It's sort of like, you might be a really good basketball player, but like, do you want to play in the NBA, or do you want to play in your local league, or do you just
Right.
want to play pickup with the guy, in your neighborhood? Like, those are all completely good reasons to play basketball, and you can be a really good writer, and you just decide, like, look, I don't want to go through all of the headache and effort that it takes to be published by a really big publisher and sold at Barnes and Noble and all of that. But I really want to get my story out there to an audience and make it available and have my voice out there in the world with kind of minimum fuss. And so
Right.
that's where self-publishing is really good. I always tell people, I'll probably plug this blog more than once in our conversation, but Jane Friedman, Friedman,
Mm-hmm.
Jane Friedman's blog has great advice. It's like, I always say, it's the advice that most publishers wish that they had the time to sit you down and give you. So just Google Jane Friedman, how to get published or something.
Okay.
And she breaks down in very easy steps, like, what are the pros and cons? This very question, like, what are the pros and cons? If I'm thinking about self-publishing, what are the things I should be thinking about? If my ambition is to be published by a big publisher, what should I be thinking about? And I always refer people there, because I think that she lays it out in a really easy and in-depth format, like more than I could do for you in this
Okay.
conversation, just because she has the time, and there's many entries. But the benefit of being published by a big publisher is, if you want to be a professional writer who earns a living, that's generally how you're going to do it, because there are people who earn a living as doing self-publishing, but it's a lot more difficult, because you have to, in order to get your work to the widest possible audience,
You need distribution.
you need distribution. And so with book publishing, with the big publishers, we sell into every
Mm-hmm.
bookstore, in the country. And also, because it's a book that's being published by a big publisher, it kind of comes with a seal of approval that readers trust. One
Right.
of the things,
Exactly.
and this is something that we all know, like, when we look at, if you're on Amazon and you look at like the sponsored links, and there will be 100 books that you never heard of that Amazon's pitching to you, and you really have no idea what the quality is. Like, they might actually be really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
They might be really, really not good. But you don't know, because there's just so many of them, and they're all up on Amazon.
Right.
Whereas if it's something that comes out of a big publishing house, we have professional standards.
Right.
And that really is worth something. Like, we look for a certain like professional quality of writing. And I'm not saying you can't find that on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
or that you don't find really good writers who self-publish, but it's much smaller. And then, of course, also with big publishers, we pay in advance.
Right.
So we think that we can sell copies, and we're willing to make the investment by advancing the author money. And
Right.
then, and I always sort of explain this to people, because people will be like, oh, I'm going to get rich doing this. Like, maybe, but it's a pretty small percentage of
Not
people.
quite. Yeah.
It's
People,
really
well,
small. And I will say that a lot of my authors who I publish still have day jobs,
mm-hmm.
or maybe have a spouse who is kind of has a day job that
They're
helps
holding
support
it
the
down.
family.
Yeah, I know a lot of best-selling New York Times bestseller, all those kind of bestsellers that have a full-time job still. What?
Yeah, because the business is uncertain, and we will advance an author money, but if, say, I advance an author, $20,000, they're going to pay their agent 15% of that, and it's also going to be paid out in parts. So they'll get some of the money when they sign the contract, and some of the money when the book is delivered, and some of the money when the book is published. So you might be getting your $20,000 minus 15% over 2 years, which is like not a lot of money actually. And then there's no guarantee that you'll earn that money back necessarily. A lot of books, I would say about 70% of the books that publishers pay in advance on, they don't earn back that advance. So the publisher winds up losing some money on it, and we don't recoup it. It's not like it's not like a credit card company.
It's not,
we don't come
it's not
after
like
you.
The music industry. That's what I would tell people, because a lot of people
Yes.
think the music industry, oh, I'm going to owe that money. So one of the things
we don't charge you for studio time, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to add to that why I think it's so important for authors to look at this as a business, not just, oh, I'm going to get a publishing deal and be rich, but also look at your book as a brochure. So the book is not necessarily going to make you all the money, but it'll open doors for other things. So you might get more speaking engagements, you might do workshops, you might do other things. And it really does kind of like have the key to the city. When you say, oh, I'm an author. Oh, you're an author. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say
it comes with a certain level of like professional cred, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's important.
And me personally, my direction, I want to do television and film. So being published by a major was very helpful for me, because it does open doors. People go, oh, HarperCollins. Oh,
And I think that I think that we should all be writing for all the other reasons that we want to write, because it's spiritually meaningful for us, because we want a creative outlet, because we are storytellers who need to tell stories and connect with other people, because human beings are storytellers. And you can do that at any level. I would never say to someone like, oh, well, that book's not going to be a bestseller, so like, why bother? It's completely the opposite. I think everybody should find the right outlet for them. It's just that the book publishing is a business where we are retailing a product,
right?
And it has to be a product of a certain quality so that we can get it to the audience that expects a certain type of book, a certain kind of quality from us.
So I'm almost going to close out here, but I wanted to ask you, could you give any last tips to authors who are trying to get their name out there and meet people like you? Like, I think networking is so important. So a lot of these authors are in circles and they don't know other authors. They don't know anybody.
Right.
So what would you recommend, especially now?
So I think, you and I met at a book fair. There are, in the days when we're not socially distancing, so I realize that this advice does not apply at this exact moment in our lives right now.
Right.
But generally, writers' conferences and writers' groups, if you look, they are all over the country. And I know this because I have been to writers' conferences. I have literally done them in big cities and done them in little cities, in the north and south and east and west, in the middle of the country for my entire career. If it's possible for you, and most of them charge entry fees, but there's real different levels of what they cost. Go to them and listen to, usually they are events where professionals from the industry will be there, other writers will be there. There will be workshops that do all these things, talking about craft, about writing as a business, about how to improve your writing, about just like where to get started. I have definitely signed up writers who I met at those conferences, but it's also a way to just learn about the business professionally. And if it's like any other business that you want to get into, you need to do your homework about how the business works and sort of what your book and who you as a writer, like how you would fit into it.
Right.
So writers' conferences, and then also there are a lot of really good online resources. So go to Jane Friedman's blog, Friedman. Go to her blog and just like mine it, read up on all the good stuff. She also is very generous with her links to other writing blogs and writers' communities. So follow editors on Twitter, follow agents on Twitter, follow writers on Twitter, follow all of the discussions that are being had about the business, because that's how you learn about the business. And I think that if you really start doing that, you'll suddenly, like, the clouds will roll back and it will open up for you what's actually going on. Like, how does this business actually work? And the nice thing is that because of the internet and because of social media, so much of it is really out there in the open if you just know to look. And there are online writers groups that you can join where you can workshop your things and you can network virtually with other writers. And
Right.
then also, every city where you are, there are writers groups that,
Right.
that you can find. And not all writers groups are created equal, and you might go to one and it might not be your thing and you don't like it, and so you just, that's cool. It's sort of, I always say that like finding a good writers group for a lot of writers is like, it's like a combination of finding a
Dating.
good doctor and a good church and a good date. Like
Okay.
you
Yeah.
just, you might have to go to a few before you find like the right vibe that really works for you.
Right.
But I do think being in the community of writers is so
It's so important.
helpful and like spiritually just fortifying, and really
Find
nourishing,
your
so that
tribe. Find your tribe. Yeah.
you got
Literally.
to find your, yeah, you got to find who your people are, because on one hand, writing is this very solitary thing, because when you're doing it, it's just like you and your pen and paper, you and your computer, and you're just like living in that world that's in your head.
Mhm.
But the actual world of getting published, and the business of being like a professional writer is a business like anything else. So you want to like get out there and find the people and do the networking, and it really is available to you if you're willing to put the time in. And the good news is you can put the time in and do that work while you have a day job, while you're raising your family, while you're taking care of yourself and other people. And it may take a little longer, if you're not sort of able to pursue it full time. Like it's great if you're young or you're rich and you don't have anything else to do, but like you should be able to do it little by little until you really get there, even if it just takes you years.
This book by Stephen King really inspired me tremendously.
That's a great book.
Excellent
Yeah.
book, because I loved how he even talked about how he was writing in like the laundry room on top of the washing machine. Like I mean, look at him now, you know. It's called On Writing. So for those who want to check it out, On Writing by Stephen King. Also, another resource I love is Ellen Brock, Brock, on YouTube. She's an editor, and she gives lots of critiques and tips and you know, really, especially like the whole process of writing. I learned a lot from her, so I always share her videos. So,
Okay,
any
great.
books, anything else you want to refer before we wrap up?
No, I love that Stephen King book. The other classic, there are two that I can think of. There's one that's called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Lamott. She's a sort of famous like writer, humorist, that is also about like how to sort of struggling with your writing demons and how to actually get the words out on paper. So yeah, On Writing by Anne Lamott. And Betsy Lerner, who's a former editor and now literary agent, published a book called The Forest for the Trees, which is a little bit like On Writing, but it's very instructive about, okay, how do you kind of work your way through the process of writing to have a good finished product. And those are really like for when you want to nerd out on your writing, like when you really want to, when you're really into like learning about the process of writing, which not everybody is. Some people, they just want to tell their story, but I do think that if you want to be a professional writer, those books, yeah, you want to take it seriously. And like Stephen King is someone who, I think that he's a really popular commercial fiction writer, and his stuff is so readable, and people think like, oh, like he doesn't put any time in it because he's just writing these like big, scary, creepy stories. He's like one of our best living writers. He's really, really, really good, and he's so talented that he makes it look easy.
Right. He writes for hours. Like a lot of these authors, it's a lot of time. Like I feel so behind. Like I can't even write like 8 hours a day. Like they literally write like full time. Like that's
some authors really do. And it's funny, like the amount of time that writers put in is so individual. Like I know authors who kind of set their clock, like you and I would get up and like get on the subway and go to work, and like they're like, okay, I'm going to sit down at my desk and I'm going to do this for 6 hours and then I'm going to be done. And then I know writers who either can't do that because they have a demanding job or they have small children or something. And they'll just like, they're literally up at 1 a.m. writing for an hour before they fall over with exhaustion.
Right.
And the end product is just as good either way, because human beings are like really creative animals. And so we make do with what we have. And so I never say to someone, okay, if you're not sitting at your desk for 6 hours a day, like weeping tears of blood, like you're not a real writer, because I have authors who are like, they're writing, they're sitting on top of the machine in the laundromat writing. They're like, you know, writing while their baby is asleep in the afternoon for a half hour. They're like they get it done because the creative like energy has to come out. So it's just, you got to like find a way to make it work. The only way but where I tell people that like you do need to be very businesslike is the whole question of how you get published and how you think about your work in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
That's a business. The creative vibe, like how you get the good words on the page, that's your business. Like
right.
You do you, no one needs to see it, but you like just get it done.
Well, I want to add one last thing that I recommend. I think I might have learned it from you guys. How it's good to have beta readers to read your work beforehand. Not like a whole gang of people, but even just the regular Joe Schmo that's not an editor that catches stuff sometimes that other people might not, the professionals might not even catch. So I think it's really good to have that sort of community that can help you, you know, review.
I think that really goes to like finding your people, because even I know a lot of best-selling writers who have beta readers, and in many cases the beta reader is actually are like a trusted group of other writers or something, and they'll say like, oh, I'm having a really hard time like working out this plot point, like I keep trying and I keep failing, and they'll give it to someone else to read, and the other writer will be like, well, why didn't you just do this?
Right, move chapter 2 to chapter 3, you know.
So it definitely, it's worth it. It might take you, again, it's sort of like dating, like it might take you a little while to find out which people are the people you trust to critique, because critique is a little hard sometimes. But yes, I'm a big believer in that.
Wow. Well, you have been amazing, and I'm hoping that everybody listening learned a lot. You took a lot of notes. What I will do is add the resources at the bottom of this video so that people can go check them out as well. And thank you again, Rachael.
Anytime. I'm happy to come back if people hit you up with more questions. Yeah. It's so good to see you. Let me know if people have more questions, like we can do another one.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Well, have a wonderful day, and talk to you soon.